And when you're keeping a building that's 100 years old up to code, it's expensive. There's a lot of things you have to take care of, a lot of things you have to do. And, you have plant facility money, but still when you're dealing with that old of a building, and the high school I teach in is close to 70 years old. And so a lot of times the money to keep those up has to come from your general fund. And so then you end up with perhaps a little bit less money that you can use on education because you're spending it on facilities.
Representative Bundy, how are you?
I'm doing great today. Appreciate it, Todd. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for coming. I know you had a full day of school today, so it's awesome that we could connect. You are on a bunch of different committees. You're a big fan of education, which I love. You're on the budget committee, and education and budget are, these are tricky individuals to be dealing with at this point. The funding of schools, especially in your district, which is a more rural district. So we have, older school buildings. We have a more sparsely populated geography. We have lower tax bases. Talk to me. How do we do this? How do we fund schools and support the education system?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and chat with you. And I do currently teach at Mountain Home High School, which I came to Mountain Home 25 years ago was my final duty station. So after I retired from the Air Force, I got a job teaching high school and coaching baseball, and I've just loved it ever since. But Mountain Home's a unique school district. About a third of our kids, if not a little bit higher, are military dependents. So we also have a large portion of our base of our student body that lives on the Air Force base. And if you live on Air Force base, they don't pay property taxes. So we have a kind of an interesting funding issue on top of everything else, where a large portion of our student body live in non-property tax housing on base, which is fine. We love it. I've lived in base housing in my past. My kids have gone to schools. But your point in a rural district, which we are, where Elmore County is a very rural, 28,000 in our county, 14,000 in the city, is we have older buildings. One of our buildings, I think I was mentioned to you earlier, is over 100 years old. And when you're keeping a building that's 100 years old up to code, it's expensive. There's a lot of things you have to take care of, a lot of things you have to do. And, you have plant facility money, but still when you're dealing with that old of a building, and the high school I teach in is close to 70 years old. And so a lot of times the money to keep those up has to come from your general fund. And so then you end up with perhaps a little bit less money that you can use on education because you're spending it on facilities. And I think we took a big step forward the last couple of years with some of our property tax reductions, where like 521 this year, House Bill 521, we're going to go in and do some property tax relief, where we're also going to give facilities monies to the districts. So you're going to get anywhere based on your average daily attendance, this pot of money that they have, they just allocated it out based on student population, which benefits the large districts because if you're a small district and you compare the size of your basketball court to that in a bigger district, it's the same size basketball court. I just may not have as many students in my building to fund my building. So I use kind of the basketball court analogy to kind of let people understand that. But
because you still need a roof, you still need the foundation, you need the same facilities.
Correct.
You just don't have the same number of students walking through, and the students obviously equate to budget.
Correct. That's how our funding is based on average daily attendance, which means if I have, I'm just going to use an easy number, if I have 1,000 kids enrolled in my school and I have 50 kids absent average per day, then I get the funding for 950 students because that's how many show up every day. But the reality is that I still have to have the funding and the room and the teachers for the full 1,000. So that's how that works. And I get it. It's in-person education. We want to encourage folks, and we want to make sure that we take care of the taxpayer dollars. So I understand why the legislature and the governor's gone back to average daily attendance so that we get our attendance back where we should to pre-COVID levels.
Right. Now, one of the problems with funding of schools is that when you say money for schools, like our schools need more resources, most people don't distinguish between the physical building and the maintenance and then education. So when you're saying we have to take this money out of the general fund, which might not go to education, some people look at that and they're like, well, wait, you just said that you were putting the money into education because you're going to like revamp the actual school buildings. But these are two different funding issues, correct?
In theory, yeah, because it's if you want to look at like a home budget, once again, I'll just use an easy number. If I'm making $5,000 a month and I have to make sure that I cover all of my assets, I'm going to need a reserve sometimes for an emergency. And so, we get a certain amount for certain things. But if all of a sudden one of my building needs a new roof and I haven't done a physical facilities levy for that and I don't have that planned out, and that's why I think in 521 we were smart. We have to have a 10-year plan for this facilities money. But there's still things that come up with older buildings that you haven't foreseen or budgeted for, but you still have to do it because you want your students in a safe environment.
Yeah.
So if you have an emergency, if you have something happens, if you have a boiler break or something like that, you have to find the facilities money that you may not already have allocated for facilities that you have to find from another source.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com. Are the funding mechanisms for education in general tied to the same 3% growth from say a city budget or something, or are they strictly just on average daily attendance?
That's a great question. So the budget increase itself is just like everybody else. It's about a 3% was our goal this year. But let's say that your district grows by 100 extra students. Based on the formula, you'll be funded for those extra students. And on the same token, if your district loses students, you could lose money in your next year's budget based on how many students you have. So what we do in the education budgets is we make a best guess. And let's say that historically you've had 1,000 students and you might see a 1 or 2% growth, and we would budget you for the 1,000 students plus the growth. But
Sure.
that's what the budgeted spending authority is. But if you end up with fewer students, then you're not going to necessarily get that full allocation because you're going to get what you actually have come to school. The other side, once again, if we budget you for 1,000 students, but you end up with way more than that, there are mechanisms that we also will cover and fund the increase in students. So your increase or decrease may be different, but it's still, you might get a bigger increase because you have more students, but it would still be only the 2 or 3% increase per student.
Gotcha.
Okay, so
yeah.
They're still limited.
It's a complex thing because you have a budget increase per student, but then you have a moving target with the actual number of students.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So how do we manage that when inflation was like 9% last year or something, and our school districts are only getting this let's hold the number of students completely steady and say okay, we got 1,000 students. That's it. 1,000 students this year, next year, the year after, fine, whatever. But then if our facilities are already lagging behind, if we don't have enough money necessarily allocated to maintain them at the level that, for instance, I was speaking with Senator Treacle a couple months ago. He was talking about, like a sewer leak under one of his facility buildings in I think it was Valley View. How do we deal with this when we recognize the value of the dollar has considerably decreased? Right. I mean, if you have a 9% inflation, but then your budget is only allowed to go up 3%, dollar for dollar, then you have to start taking allocations away from different areas.
Or what some of the districts have had to do are these, like I've mentioned, the plant facilities levies, where that you have needs for your district that your budget's not going to be able to support. So that's when a district might go out for a levy, knowing that they have these expenses for new roofs or a new sewer system that have to be taken care of. So they'll go out for a levy and try to get that money and then pay it off through the levy process. So the plant facilities levies and things like that are usually a simple majority. That's the bond, that's the super majority, which we're having a very difficult time in rural districts getting bond issues through. And a lot of districts are having a lot of trouble getting levies through. And the levies address exactly what you're talking about, is the shortfall in the funding formula to take care of these facilities needs.
The nuances with getting a bond passed are really complex, especially in rural areas. Could you help me understand that a little bit more? Because again, people have explained it to me before, and sometimes I'm like, okay, wait, my head just exploded, right? Like, why is it so cheap in Ada County to say pass a bond, or let's say West Ada School District? It would be cheaper per household to pass a bond or a facilities levy in West Ada than it would be in, say, for your school district.
Correct.
Why is that?
Tax base.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, if you go to Ada County, you go to Gem County or Canyon County, you have a lot more major industries. And I don't want to pick on a big business, but when you come out of Mountain Home, out of Elmore County and drive in there and you make that slight turn, there's a lot of business in there. There's your Microns and there's your Hewlett Packards and there's all those kind of businesses that that increase the tax base of a county. And those type of tax bases don't necessarily exist in your smaller rural districts. So it pushes the tax burden more to the property tax level as opposed to having an industrial tax base also.
Gotcha. So just by the fact that, say, industries in rural counties, the industry is, let's say, agriculture, and that agriculture is produced by, you got a farmer on like 1,000 or 2,000 acres, like he's it.
Yep.
And yeah, he's producing economic opportunity within that area because he is working the land, but he's also just one household with one property tax bill.
Correct, but and that's a very good point for a county like Elmore County and other agricultural counties, is we really rely heavily on our agricultural communities to support the communities, and they come through and they're champions. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a major agricultural entity in Elmore County, and they gladly pay their property taxes, they gladly do all the support things, but they kind of jokingly they said they've got all this agricultural land that is paying property taxes. And he says, and you know what? My agricultural land has never had to call EMS. It's never had to call the sheriff. And so, so they, and I know that's kind of and they meant it in a good way, but it's,
Sure.
But in your ag communities, the agricultural folks are paying a big portion of the community's property taxes. Now, as are the citizens. And property taxes are something that we've addressed, and I think the last 2 or 3 years we've done some very good things at the state level in reducing property tax commitments to the individual citizens. So I think that's been important.
Yeah. Hey, look, I've appreciated it. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, that's always a nice phone call when someone says, "Hey, my property taxes just went down," and it's.
Do you ever get that phone call?
I've gotten a few, and I've had a couple of people.
For you.
A couple of people when the assessments are sent out, they say, I looked at my bill and it went down this last time. And it's been significant for some folks, so that's good.
God, good for you. Look, I have not lived here that long. I've lived here about 2.5 years, and I'm always so taken by the decency that people have here to see something good happen. It's like, hey, you're my representative. Like, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm happy about this. Like, good stuff. The utilization of land for revenue, for business model, continues to exist throughout the state of Idaho, but the actual function of generating revenue is changing a little bit. So it used to be, speaking with a professor at Boise State, months back, and he said, look, people used to work land as a means of production, right? Mm-hmm. And now people are collecting land and working land as a investment towards development later on. Right. It's not like, hey, I have this land and I'm, hopeful, in like a generation or 2 or 3, like my great grandkids will be able to sell it or keep working it. Now it's kind of like, okay, let's grab this and, let the farmer keep working on it. But, our plans are to develop it. And that's obviously, not that exact model, but we are losing agricultural land significantly. What do you see that playing out in your counties as well? Or is it more development down to the south?
Well, I think we are seeing development in Mountain Home, and I know that there has been some agricultural land that's been turned into developments. And I don't know that there's any way, with personal property rights, that it's a very tough hurdle to jump when you want to maintain your agricultural land. But I do know that in my counties, in Elmore County, I have a crazy district. I have Elmore County, Boise County, Valley County, Custer County. So you pick something in the outdoor resources, mining, logging, agriculture,
Sure.
It's all there. But it seems like our major agricultural producers in Elmore County are maintaining the family-owned options. And so we have a very strong agricultural community in the high school and an agricultural program. And it's really fun to talk to these kids that are graduating from high school that are planning on staying in the family agricultural business. And they're going up to U of I, they're going into welding, they're doing all kinds of things. They're going back to work on the farms and the ranches. And so I think in our community, we have I don't see it as maybe what we're seeing in Ada County, because a lot of these bigger farms and ranches in Elmore County are staying family owned. But we are also seeing the development of the land too. And that's a big thing too, because do you go into unincorporated where you just keep sticking a hole in that aquifer, or do you annex into the city and create a subdivision? So there's a mixture of that going on where subdivisions are annexing into the city for water resources, wastewater and drinking water. And then we also have some developments that are going in with the bigger lots, with the independent wells on their land, or we're starting to see some of the unincorporated subdivisions that are doing common water projects, common wells, and then within themselves are having the water in their wells. So it's a complex question, when people have these or buying up land to develop it, and then we also need the ongoing agricultural need too.
Right. Do you have many instances or any instances of private lands essentially being acquired for the purpose of housing large game animals that are then, the tags or deprivation tags sold out to private individuals? Because I've been talking to a lot of fish and game people, retired individuals, hunters, and things of that nature. And the state, with the wolf reintroduction from, a long time ago, what people are finding is they're like, look, either the area that I used to hunt or the area that I want to hunt is either, barren, or the animals are close by. They've just migrated onto private property and we can't get access to that private property. Is that an issue with some of the ranches up in your area?
Not that I've heard a lot about. My understanding is a lot of the ranches are still available that you can get access so that you can get through to get to public lands. But I do know that we've done a few things in the legislature over the past few years to make it perhaps a little bit more conducive to let for private property owners to give access to the public lands. So there's some things that we're trying to do there so that we can help them to enforce proper care of the land,
right?
Things like that. So, but I haven't heard of any in my district, any moves to get land that's going to be used for those type of purposes.
Well, that's great, because it seems incredibly frustrating. And again, I have not had personal experience with this where I'm, go out and I see an elk, a couple miles away and I can't go get it, but the number of hunters that I've heard that are really frustrated by that strategy is,
Yeah. And from the hunters I talk to, I think the hunting, I've lived in Elmore County for 25 years, and I think that we have seen a change in the hunting. There's a lot more folks coming in from out of state and other hunters that are coming in. It's changed the dynamics, I think, of hunting for a lot of folks in Idaho.
Man, that's one of those things. I had a gentleman by the name of Seth Simpson on. He's a big hunting dog trainer and bird dogger and hunter himself, all kinds of different things. And he said the number of people that are coming from out of state to get big game tags or just use the area because of other states' mismanagement of their fish and game departments. Right. It's like, dude, can Idaho just catch a break? Like, can we just stop with the crisis in other states leading people here to take advantage of the resources?
Yeah. And they're coming in large numbers to use our parks also. Mm-hmm. I guess if there is a good side to out-of-staters coming in to use our parks and our campgrounds, as we passed a law a couple of years ago where we charge the out-of-staters a little higher rate. Mm. And so our dedicated fees went up. So we have more money available, which decreases the need for general fund money in the parks. So I guess if you charge an out-of-stater a little bit more money to come and use your park,
out-of-state tuition, no problem.
Then that increases the amount of dedicated money that we have for our state parks, and then we use less Idaho taxpayer money and less general fund money.
So talk to me about the budgeting for the rest of the state then, because obviously schools are a big problem, but law enforcement is also a big issue. Another thing that's directly tied to quality of life, that Idaho has a very proud history of supporting law enforcement, but we're also growing, at an incredible rate. And you can make the assumption that most people coming here are good people, but a collection of good people is also a large collection of targets for bad people. And, some people coming here may not be the best. So how do we continue funding those people?
That has been over the last couple of budgets a big issue. When you talk about Department of Corrections and the brave men and women that work at the prison system, our salaries were not even competing with fast food restaurants. And so we had to make a concentrated effort over a couple of years to make it worth their while, to make it a career that pays what it should, and so we had to do some targeted raises in there. And I think we've been able to stem the tide. And last time I spoke with the Department of Corrections, it's the first time in a while that they've been close to 100% manned. We're still not quite there, but that's helped, and so we have to find that money somewhere else from somewhere so that you can move it into the Department of Corrections and pay. We have the other thing that we do at the state level with law enforcement is Idaho State Police budget. And with the governor's leadership and Colonel Wills over in the state police, we've sent some folks down to kind of our mission at the southern border so that they can learn from and participate in the protection of the southern border. And in addition to some real world training, which is awesome, it gives the folks that go down there and participate in that mission the ability to learn real time how to do those functions and those activities. And then those folks come back and then they teach the other ISP folks those talents and those skills that they were able to practice and learn down on the southern border. And so I think that was a really, really important investment that we have made over the last budget session, is to allow our ISP or our state police force and our troopers the ability to go down to the southern border to learn the skills that are necessary to come up here in Idaho. And those things are bleeding up into Idaho. We all know it is. And so then they learn the skills and they're able to train each other and get just way more practice and way more skills and way more competence in those areas than they would if they weren't able to go down there and do that. So that's a big thing that we're able to fund and do with ISP. So,
do you feel like the funding mechanisms and conversations that I've been having will be sufficient for coming years, or do you think that the can has kind of been kicked down the road to a sense?
I think that I've been on the budget committee for 4 years, so I was very fortunate as a freshman to come in and go right on the budget committee. And I hope people understand the very intense process that a state budget goes through. It's almost a constant. Once we set this budget, they are starting on the next budget. And it comes in and we talk to the department heads, and there's 10 senators and 10 members of the House, and we do about 110 budgets. So most of us, we will be kind of involved in all of the budgets, but you really take 10 to 20 budgets that become your specialty, and you really dig deep into those budgets. You get to know what's in the base budget, is what's going on in the base budget, what they need to do. They're making a crest. Like I worked on the Department of Agriculture budget, and they requested some more another veterinarian because the dairy industry in the Twin Falls area is $1 billion business, and we needed some more dairy testers. And when you look at that, it's like, well, is it worth us doing? But then when you look at it, it's going to be paid with dedicated fees, meaning the fees that the dairy have to pay to have their milk tested and, those processes. That's the money that we're using to increase our ability to test the milk. So if they're paying the fees to be tested and to, all those things that you have to do, then I think it's a great idea that we can hire additional support in that area based on the money that we're bringing in. So a lot of the stuff that we do, and when I say dedicated money, that means it's basically revenue that
item produces.
That item produces, correct. And so like in a park, when you go pay the entrance fee, that's a dedicated fee, and that goes back into the park. Or when your dairymen are paying a fee to the government so that you can test the milk to make sure that it's being stored right and all those other things, that's a dedicated fee that goes back in to make sure that basically...
To pay for the people testing it.
Yes, exactly. Right. And it works out great. And then, so I think that those things are, and when you get folks this will be hopefully my 5th and 6th year working on budgets, when you gain a little bit of a history in that, you kind of know what to look for. Your first year on the budget committee, it's like, I'm drinking from fire hose.
Right.
And then slowly that fire hose slows down and you're able to consume it and digest it and see what's going on. And that's why, we've talked about the education budgets, but I work education budgets, I work agriculture budgets, the Division of Veteran Services budgets, the expertise and the contact and that we have in these budget processes. And I want to let people know that the 99.9% answer is our state employees are there to benefit Idahoans. They are top-notch folks that are really want to make sure that they can provide the best agricultural services, that they can provide the best parks and the best education. Every so often there's something that, you catch and it's like, I think we can do that better. And that's why the budget process, I think, works in Idaho, is because we have so many good folks looking at the budgets that are, like, I'm an educator and I served in the Air Force for 20 years, and we have insurance people, we have some medical personnel for the health and welfare budgets and all those kind of things. So we try to put people with certain expertise in these budget processes so that they can have almost an expert look at it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes perfect sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you want to, look, everything you said.
Well, I don't know.
I have a propensity at times, which bothers me, by the way, even if nobody knows this, but I have a propensity sometimes to repeat something somebody said, but it's like, he said it completely fine. Like, there's nothing that bears, clarification, but that's just the way my brain works. I appreciate it. What are other big budget things that the state's wrestling with that people may not be familiar with? Because obviously law enforcement's a big one. You have education, that's a big one.
Yeah, infrastructure obviously is a huge one. And, we had those couple of years with some really big budget surpluses. And I think it was smart that we did three things with the budget surplus. Budget surplus meaning we brought in more revenue than we were anticipating. Sure. And so we gave some back to the taxpayer, which I think you should do, because if you're collecting too many taxes, then you're collecting too many taxes. Then we also did some adjustments with the tax rates. But then there's the third part of this leg that we did, is we took a big chunk of money and we invested it in future infrastructure. And so when you're running at a 3 or 4% budget growth rate, and you've got inflation, and you're trying to upkeep roads and build new roads, and this is where the increase in our population, I think, is really starting to show some wear and tear on our infrastructure and our roads and our bridges. I think it was good that we allocated a good chunk of that surplus towards future infrastructure needs.
Where does that, because it's future infrastructure needs, does it just go into like a savings account and wait?
No, what we do is we'll take, say, $100 million.
Sure.
And we will
just a quick 100 million.
Yeah, just an easy number to remember.
No problem.
Okay, and we'll put it into ITD, or we'll put it in Division or Department of Water Resources with specific projects in mind. And usually those there's you can't just hold on to it forever. So these are planned projects, because there's always a list of projects that you need. And I'll pick on Department of Water Resources now. The Department of Water Resources does a great job of prioritizing aquifer recharge.
Sure.
All those kind of things. And so when you get a chunk of money, then you, and for infrastructure, and then you allocate it to water, then you'll allocate that money, and then you will tag that money to the project. And the reason you need to tag the money to the project is so you can start the planning process, the preparation process, getting everything in line so that you can start it's a year or two out.
Yeah.
So that money is allocated, and it's there, and it's just sitting there waiting to be used. It's kind of like, you're not going to go build your house until you have your loan, or these aren't loans.
Well, I mean, if you're like, hey, here's the deal. I have, $500,000 allocated to build my house.
Yep.
Well, that doesn't happen tomorrow.
Correct.
Let's say you have the lot, you got to like get the engineering done. You got to get the architecture done. You got to get everything approved. It's sitting there waiting. And then eventually you start buying supplies.
Yep. And you start to hire the contractors, and you start to do all those kind of things. So that's what we've done. So you're going to really start seeing from the money that we allocated from those budget surpluses, you're going to start to see those constructions starting. Some of them have started this summer, but now you're going to start to see the benefits of that work that we did a year or two ago with some of that budget surplus money. And there's always those Idahoans in it, they'll say, like, why didn't you just keep all of it and do infrastructure? And that's nice for people to say, but there's other folks that do appreciate the tax tweaks, and also the tax rebates that we gave them.
I thought you were going to say there are some Idahoans that say, why don't you just give all of it back?
Well, there's that too. So it's a balancing act. Yeah. I should have said that in there too.
Those are some really like civic oriented Idahoans who are like, why did you just, keep it all and just hit the bridges? Like, make sure I don't want to fall in the water, make sure the bridges are good and the highways are good. And
yeah, I was kind of at a comma, but you're correct.
Yeah.
That there is that aspect out there that would have been, and I get it. I totally understand the fact, if we're, we have a budget of this and we have higher tax rate. I mean, I get the idea and the concept to return all of the money, but then you do have to balance the future also. And that's, I think, especially with Idaho growth, we're the fastest growing state in the nation. All kinds of things in there that we're going to have to make sure that we have the resources. And I mean, if you look at a map, we are a big state geographically. Yeah. And, there's, and I love them. The North Idaho guys are different than the East Idaho guys are different than the Treasure Valley guys, and Elmore County's kind of almost in between a couple of them, but I think we associate and we're close enough to Ada County that we'll jump in that.
You're
group.
Like the nice cousin who comes to the Thanksgiving. You're like, well, Mike doesn't get along with Matt, but I'll talk to them each individually, no problem.
Yeah. And so, like I said, I've been here for 25 years and there's different distinct personalities to different parts of the state. And that plays itself out in the legislature also, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Listen, I have a bigger question that's I don't understand this. Idaho doesn't go into debt. Okay,
correct.
Great.
Yep.
Great. All of us go into debt. Okay, I've gotten a car. I don't have a car loan right now, but I've gotten car loans in the past. When I bought my first car, of course, I didn't have money. I was a kid, right? I mean, a mortgage, who's buying a house with all cash, right? Not me, not Matt.
Yeah.
Slinging my podcast revenue, which is exactly zero. Actually, that's not true. I made $40 off YouTube last year. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited about it personally. It was I was that's the hardest $40 I've ever in my whole life ever made. But how does Idaho, especially when we're growing so aggressively and we have this cap on our budgets, and we're experiencing growth, we have a cap on our budgets, and we're experiencing the greatest inflation of this generation since after the Vietnam War. Actually, did we have big inflation in the 90s? No, we had a housing slump in the 90s. Yeah. So we haven't experienced real inflation since the late 70s and early 80s. And here it's we almost hit the double digit inflation, and here Idaho's clocking along at 3% and not going into debt. How does this work?
I think first off, we have our Idaho constitutional mandate that we cannot go in debt.
Oh, I'm not saying you're a good person for this. I'm just saying how do you make the magic happen?
And then what typically will happen is the 2 or the 3% or whatever we put on the growth of the budget is usually self-imposed. And we're basing these on projected revenue. And then you get your quarterly updates.
Come back to this, or pull the microphone over.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Get comfortable.
Am I?
There you go.
Is that a little bit better?
You were blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I kind of was moving away from it. I apologize. But what the state will do is they'll do a revenue projection. And for those of us that remember back in the 2008, 2009, 2010 downturn in the economy, I was been teaching about 4 or 5 years there. And if we don't have enough money based on, if we make a certain revenue projection, but our revenues are under that, then in the year, you're going to have to do some budget cuts. And that's what happened in the 2009, 2010 timeframe. And that was at a time when a lot of us forget that teachers took pay cuts, and there were some serious budget cuts in mid-year. So on the other end of that is when you have a downturn, you have to you can only spend, I thought I was going to have $1,000, but I only have $800 when I end up at the grocery store. So they're only going to let me have $800 worth of groceries.
Right.
So a lot of it has been, and this question came up the other day, and it's not the perfect answer, but they said, well, where did most of this revenue come from for these budget surpluses? And a lot of it was sales tax, because people just continued to buy stuff, even though they projected in the 2020-21 timeframe that people wouldn't buy as much and that we would have a recession. And the recession never played out, and people kept spending and buying stuff. And they were fixing their homes, and so the revenue was there, and a lot of it was sales tax revenue.
Yeah, but when we talk about large capital projects, it just
Oh yeah.
it's so cool to me that we're able to do that. And I get it. You're like, hey, look, we're mandated to do it. Okay, fine. You're mandated. That doesn't mean that, like, I could be mandated to do a lot of things that I don't know how to do, right? But the fact that Idaho is able to do this, keep up with infrastructure, keep up with large capital projects, and deal with the fact that we still have to stay in the black. It's like, I guess the answer is if you have to do it, you just do it.
Yeah, it's weirdly enough, I think that is the answer. If you project $100,000 in revenue as maybe your family income for the year, and you just don't spend any more. And the other thing that Idaho's done is we do have we're allowed to have a certain amount of money in reserve. And one of the things that we were also able to do with that budget surplus is to max out our reserves. So if
that's smart. That's a smart play.
That was a good move by the executive branch and the legislative branch both combined on that one. So that's a good move to make sure. And the reason is because you don't want to just be able to have just this massive amount of money in reserves because people pay taxes so that you use it. But I do think it's smart that the state of Idaho has been able to max out our reserves in case we do have a downturn. And then you would be able to fund some of these capital projects out of your reserves if you needed to.
Right. But that's like a financial water tower, right? Like you fill the thing up, you keep the pressure coming, like ups, downs, you have flow of water, fine, but you have that backup push in the event that you need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've talked about a lot of things, a lot of different topics. Have we missed anything that you really want to hit on?
No, like I say, I've been very fortunate throughout my life. Right out of college, I went to flight school and got to be in the Air Force for 20 years and got to do some really things. I just really enjoyed it. I started off flying bombers in the Cold War and finished up flying bombers over Afghanistan after 2001. But the thing that I'm really, for the listeners, I hear a lot of times, people are worried about the future. And I get to hang out with high school seniors. And I'll tell you, they are sharp. There's good kids. I think parents should be proud of what their kids are doing. They've got goals, they've got dreams, and and it seems like in the 20 years I've been teaching that the number of kids that want to stay in Idaho is going up. I think that they're excited about Idaho's future. They're excited about the opportunities that Idaho has. But I really have enjoyed for 20 years to be able to hang out with 17 and 18-year-olds, and you really get a good feel for a generation when you get to work with them every day and have conversations with them every day. It's just really been, I've been really fortunate. I just want folks to know that, what I see, and I think I've got a pretty good cross-section of society in Mountain Home, is these are good kids. They're going to be good leaders, good Idahoans. Since we're a military town, I think we send a lot more kids into the military than the average high school. When I graduated from high school, there were 400 of us, and I think 4 of us went in the military. In Mountain Home, we tend to send about 15 to 20% of our kids every year into the military. And a lot of them come back. So I'll see a kid that will come back in town, and he spend these 4 or 6 years, or some spend longer. So it's really a great place for me to have landed and been able to spend the longest period of my life in Mountain Home. Because, when you're in the Air Force, you move every 2 years. And I haven't moved for 25 years, so I got lucky and landed here and decided to stay.
Well, I'll tell you what, I hope I'm telling somebody in 22 years that I haven't moved for 25 years.
Yeah, it's I'll tell you what, after moving my family 10 times in 20 years, just decided we were going to stick here, and it's been a great move for us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for coming in. Thanks for standing up for Idaho and bringing the issues to light. And win, lose, or draw, thanks for running a campaign. I think it's, I always mean it. It's interesting how important it is to have varying views and different ideas come forward, and how much that produces the best possible outcome for the average person.
Yep, I appreciate that. And this has been a great opportunity, so thanks.
Thank you. MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.